Hi, everybody. I hope you're doing well and staying safe during these challenging times we're living in. I'm Karna Sunby, life coach at Peak Health and Wellness and a master practitioner of NLP, which stands for Neuro Linguistic Programming. You can find out more about NLP at my website, which is inneraccess.org. You know, we're living in the midst of really challenging times these days, times of immense change in our country and in the world. And so I thought this would be a great time to look at the nature of change and to give you some insight into cycles of change. Because whether you love change or hate change, change is always going to happen. And how you deal with change is a determining factor in how successful you'll be in life. There is a study which was done called The Science of Complexity, which is the study of patterns and cycles in the universe. And what they realized through the study of complexity is that every system goes through patterns and cycles of change, whether it's the season, a relationship, a computer, or the global economy. So if you can understand the basic universal cycles of change and how they relate to areas of your life, you're onto one of the great keys to success. There's a diagram of the universal cycles of change as an attachment in this newsletter, and I'm going to go through it in detail. I'm going to go through each phase of it to help you understand each phase of the cycle and how you can apply it to your life. So you might want to print it out or look at it before you continue listening. Let's take the seasons and look at the cycle we witness every year as the seasons change. We start with creation. As the winter moves into the spring, after a long winter, doesn't it make you so happy when you see those little sprouts of daffodils and tulips coming up around March or April? And then the trees and the bushes start to bud and bloom, and little delicate shoots of grass start to grow. It's creation. It's the beginning of something new. In this case, the beginning of new life. So that's the beginning, and then the next stage is growth. In May and June, those tulips and daffodils and all kinds of other flowers bloom, and the trees and bushes completely blossom. And some trees grow little flowers and then tiny little fruits. The foothills turn green, and the nurseries become these palettes of color, and the air is sweet with the fragrance of so many flowers. It's springtime. It's the time of growth. And then the next stage is called, it's a stage in every cycle called complexity to maturity. In nature, in the seasons, this happens in the summer. By July and August, moving into September, everything has grown to its full maturity. The flowers and trees are in full bloom, the fruit is ripening, lawns are lush, and wildflowers are flourishing. And like I say, everything is in their full state of maturity or complexity. And I ask you, does it ever stay like that? Summer forever? Happily ever after? Is there ever a flower that just blooms forever? No. By early autumn, the plants and trees reach their full stage of maturity, and that is as much as they're going to grow. The next stage in every cycle is that of turbulence. With the seasons, the weather begins to change, the leaves turn colors, and then they begin to dry up and fall off the trees. Now here's the important concept to understand. Turbulence is simply feedback from the environment that says that this complex state can no longer be supported. So after turbulence comes the dropping off stage. The leaves and flowers are literally dropping off the trees and bushes right now because we're in autumn. All living systems allow themselves some kind of dropping off because all systems get so complex that something has to give. And even every non-living system requires a dropping off. You have to dump the trash can in your computer sometime or it'll slow down and it might even crash if it becomes too complex. There is only one living system that doesn't allow itself to go through this process, that allows itself to stay stuck in turbulence and move into chaos without letting go of what it needs to drop off. Can you guess what system that is? Yes, it's human beings. In autumn, when the leaves are starting to fall, can you imagine walking by a tree and hearing it say, I don't want to change. I don't want to let go of these leaves. No, the leaves drop off from the trees every year. And then all of nature goes into the last stage, a stage of quiet dormancy. The tree stands there in the cold winter and it rests and rejuvenates and prepares itself for a new cycle. And that phase of creation begins all over again in the spring. So now let's look at how this cycle applies to your life and how, if you understand the cycle, you can avoid failure in every area of your life. So let's look at it from different subjects. So the first stage is creation. This cycle happens with every system, and every system has a beginning, a creation. So let's say it's a business. You start off with the creation of an idea. Every business starts with the creation of an idea. Let's say it's a person. A person begins with fertilization and cell division, and a life is created. If we look at a relationship, it begins when you meet someone and you feel some sense of chemistry and love is created. Let's say you're buying a car. Buying a car starts out with choosing the model and then purchasing it. So that is the very first stage of creation, the beginning. The next stage is that of growth. When the system begins to grow and develop, it becomes self-organizing. The initial creation begins to take some form or shape. So in the example of the business, a marketing plan is developed and the product or service begins to sell. In the example of that new life, that baby you created, it grows, it gets born and grows and takes their first steps and speaks their first words. And how about the relationship? In the example of the relationship that you created, that relationship begins to develop patterns. Do you remember when you first fell in love with someone, how incredible you felt with all those endorphins surging, and that person that you were so in love with was so perfect? And that lasted usually about 3 months. That's what I call the perfect stage. And then it changes, because a relationship is a system which goes through a cycle. And how about the car? The example of the car. The car you bought is fantastic. And maybe now you decide to take some road trips. So that is the stage of growth. Then the next stage is moving toward complexity to maturity. The system matures and moves towards a state of complexity. It might be moving towards some ultimate goal. So in the business is thriving. Sales are good, morale is high, profits are good, referrals are coming in. Then that baby you created, now it's a child in school, learning, developing friendships, discovering hobbies or sports, becoming its own little person. And how about that love you created? The relationship reaches a stage of comfort. You make a commitment. Maybe you get married and buy a house. Maybe you think about starting a family. Sometimes this stage takes a while, and sometimes it reaches this stage very quickly. And then if we look at your car, in the stage of maturity to complexity, your car is running perfectly. Then the next stage in every system is turbulence. Just like when we looked at it in nature, this is the time when the leaves turn brown and start to fall off the trees. Eventually, in every system, living and non-living, you will get that feedback that things need to change, that the system can no longer work the same way. It's gotten too complex and something needs to give. Remember this, turbulence is simply feedback from the environment. It's not a sign of disaster. In the business example, perhaps when you reach turbulence, an employee's not working out and needs to be dropped off. Or maybe a product needs to evolve and the outdated model needs to be dropped off. Maybe there's competition and expansion needs to happen. Or maybe cost cutting is necessary. But sometime in every business, there will come a time when something needs to be changed, repaired, or dropped off. And how about your child? Your wonderful little sweet child becomes a teenager, and suddenly it seems like nothing's working anymore. Parents need to realize that this child is becoming a young adult, and a new way of communicating, new boundaries, new perspectives are required. That way of seeing your child, your teenager as a child, needs to be dropped off so that they can grow into adulthood. And if we look at that relationship, perhaps the environment has changed. Maybe you did start to family, or you move, or you start a new business, or you start a new interest, or someone dies, or you remodel your house. And the changing environment can throw your relationship into turbulence. Maybe some attitude or some ways of communicating or lack of communication throws the relationship into turbulence. Perhaps someone has an affair or falls out of love, and then major turbulence sets in. And in the example of your car, when you hit turbulence, maybe you hear a knock in the engine or some other funny little noise starts to happen. But the key to dealing with this, the key to change and turbulence, is to accept that change is always going to happen. Everything is always going to change. Every system will change. The key is to understand this cycle. Just like the flower that doesn't keep blooming forever, no business reaches a point of success and just keeps thriving without changing anything. And your child doesn't stay sweet and fun and dependent upon you forever, hopefully. And in spite of what the fairy tales say, no couple lives happily ever after. And your car, once you get the knock in the engine, it's not going to run forever without some repairs. Every system will reach a point of turbulence. The secret is to, number one, recognize that turbulence is simply feedback from your environment that something needs to change. Number two, understand what needs to drop off or be repaired or be changed in order to gear up to recreate the system and so that it becomes even better. And number three, by being aware of this process, you can own your own experience, and then you have the awareness to improve the system. If you do this, hopefully you will avoid the whole phase called chaos. But if you don't recognize that turbulence is happening and it's simply feedback from that something needs to be changed, the system will go into chaos. The business may go into chaos and fail. Can you think of examples of companies who didn't change with the times, who didn't repair damage, who didn't drop off something that was necessary to drop off, who couldn't cope with the challenges, and they went out of business? There are many examples in our world today of companies that's happened to. And then your teenager, if you don't change how you communicate with your teenager and allow them to grow up, they may stop listening entirely. They may start hanging out with the wrong crowd or looking for love in all the wrong places or run away from home or worse. And how about your marriage? If you don't stop to realize what's causing the turbulence in your marriage and what needs to change in your relationship, you may end up in chaos. You may end up in divorce. Maybe it's a perspective or an attitude which needs to be dropped, or a pattern which needs to change. Maybe it's the way you're communicating or the lack of communication that's the problem. Sometimes the thing that caused the turbulence can be dropped off instead of dropping off the whole marriage. And how about your car? If you don't take your car into the shop, when you hear that knock in the engine, the whole thing could blow up. Do you know people who live in constant turbulence and chaos? I do. It's often because they're trying to hold on to the old way, which no longer fits. Remember that turbulence is simply feedback that the system has outgrown itself and needs to change. And if you make those changes, those necessary changes, you can very possibly avoid the system going into chaos. The final stage is dormancy and rejuvenation. Sometimes we just need to stop and reflect, meditate, and have some inward silence, like that tree does when it's standing there in the cold, crisp winter. A time to renew and rejuvenate. Once you've done that, you can become creative again. You will have dropped off what was holding you back, and you will have gained knowledge and wisdom and understanding, all that you need to make that system better. And then you can move into a new cycle, a new phase of creation once again. Successful businesses often have an executive retreat for their leadership team in order to reevaluate and what they need to do to evolve, to renew and rejuvenate. I've worked with parents and their teenagers to develop new ways of communication, and I've given them tools to help with their listening and help them see things from the other person's perspective. And often our sessions lead to lots of reflection on the part of both people and a renewal of their relationship. And I've worked with many couples separately and together to help them get to the root cause of the turbulence and change the patterns that can destroy love. Sometimes couples have a separation, but that really only works as a time of rejuvenation if one or both people are looking at the source of the issues and understanding what needs to be changed in order to recreate that relationship. So there you have the universal cycles of change. Attached to this newsletter is a handout which describes the various changes I've just gone through and gives you a worksheet developed by Chris Hallbaum of the NLP Coaching Institute of California. The worksheet will help you look at your life, all the different areas of your life, and understand where you are in this cycle in each area of your life. You could be in the stage of creation in your career and maturity in your relationship and turbulence in your health and chaos with your finances. Every area of your life could be in a different phase of the cycle. But understanding what areas are in turbulence is a great step towards making changes so that in your life, so that you can be happier. I'm Karna Sunby. I'm a life coach and a master practitioner of NLP. You can just give me a call or shoot me an email if you would like a free consultation to discuss the changes that you'd like to make in your life.